Let's move to a slightly more creative and ethical side of this discussion, which is, and one thing that I keep thinking when I experience VR projects myself is I find it ironical that we live in a world somehow that where we're so totally distracted by so many different handset and screen, etc., that I heard a lot of people saying, oh, you know, the strength of VR is that finally you can concentrate on something. Like if the fact of just not seeing anything else is the only way to go through the totality of the 5-10 minutes of video. I find that puzzling, really. What are your views on these?
Well, this is why brands love making things for VR, because you can immerse somebody in their brand story, and that's all that they're going to really be immersed in. They're not going to be distracted by their phone or by some other screen somewhere. But I think that it's a really good point, and it's a really awesome thing about VR is that it's a rare thing to be able to get people's attention these days. But assuming that they don't take the headset off, which they might, but assuming that they don't, you have someone's full attention. You can't really concentrate on anything other than what you're seeing in the experience.
And at the same time, most of the social platforms that we are using are all about being in contact with others. Is the communication that seems to be the glue of our screens. So when is it that we will have communication and VR merging together? Because at the moment it's me and this world where I'm landing most of the time, and there doesn't seem to be a social level of it. So what are the plans for social VR? Where are we going there?
There is Facebook. I mean, Facebook has there's the Facebook 360 player, but there's also a Facebook 360 app in the Oculus Store where all the Facebook 360 content is accessible in the...
But what I mean is being in contact with others through VR.
Yeah, so there's a number of different social platforms. I think you were talking about social platforms. So there's a few of them. Facebook is building one. They just sort of announced this new one called Spaces, I think. And it's really just sort of an avatar system. So you kind of make your own avatar, and then you go into various different computer-generated spaces, and you can do things with other people in there. One of them that I really like, which is not a Facebook product, is called Rec Room. I don't know if you've ever played Rec Room. It's for HTC Vive and Oculus Rift, and it's really amazing. I was describing it to you earlier. When I tried it for the first time a few months ago, I was blown away by just how seamless interaction is with other people within like a mediated VR environment. I mean, you can do these little mini games in Rec Room, like darts or, you know, frisbee golf or things like that. It's just strangers that random people just go into it.
So and even I would invite my friends to play online on VR as if they were here with me.
Yeah, and then you can play like frisbee golf on the moon with them, you know. And it's not like, you know, you're represented by a sort of floaty head and some arms that move around, but because all of that person's movement is perfectly tracked into that floaty head and into those arms, you really do get a sense that it's somebody else there. It's not just a cartoon representation in front of you. So social platforms are really interesting. They're going to become a much larger part of VR in the pretty near future, I think. I don't know if you guys have
there will be, but at this moment, not for the future, at this moment I see the social and VR are, let's say, in contradiction, because social platforms are all about the easiness of use and about the comfort of use, about speed of use, about the smoothness of use. And VR is against this because VR is still uncomfortable. The devices are uncomfortable. The interfaces are still not very comfortable. And that's why I believe if Facebook or other social platforms want to really be into the VR, they are right now spending hundreds of millions to develop both better devices, better interfaces, better connection system, better tracking and everything. But right now, just notice that we spend a lot of time into the social networks today, but we are physically incapable of spending a lot of time in VR. So today, if any VR experience is longer than 20 minutes is becomes very uncomfortable for you, then social platforms still today may be more like the Skype connection or phone connection, but not the typical social media where we usually spend a lot of time every day. But I believe sooner or later they need to do so, and I even believe that thanks to them, thanks to Facebook and others, we will finally have a good VR headsets and comfortable VR experience, because they are really in need to do so. Otherwise, they would fail at getting to the masses.
Do we have any question on this type of topic? Sense of presence, use of VR in a social way. You could. What I mean is that, you know, if you're a documentary maker and you can imagine to recreate a space where people are coming, asking questions, where there is interactivity within the story, then suddenly I can see lots of potential happening as, wow, this would be a total different way of speaking about a reality fact. At the moment, we're not there. The interactivity is quite low in VR. I mean, you can, if you reconstruct in 3D modeling, if you have CGI, you can interact, but most of the pieces that we see and all the stuff that is on YouTube and Facebook is actually, I'm turning my head, yeah? Are we still
Not
there? No?
I don't think
Okay,
so. No,
good.
because have you ever, I mean, in VR games, there's...
Games.
And that's...
Yes, of course. No, I'm trying to stick to the documentary
I'm sorry.
theme,
I'm sorry.
because I suspect that this is what the people here are interested in, but definitely, you know, sort of a question there. I don't know if we need a microphone or if you can just scream.
I'll try not to get, I think it's okay, right? A question to William, I think, and maybe the others have experience with this as well. As a documentary filmmaker, while you're on location, I guess it requires a total different approach to being with your subject than traditional documentary, because you can't be a fly on the wall first. You have to have a plan of what you're filming, and you have to place your subject. Do you think traditional documentary filmmaking and the technique of VR will grow towards each other, so that barrier which causes your subject to break the fourth wall will disappear, or will it always only be used to kind of break that wall?
I think that it will be. I mean, it's like the comparison that I was making before, is that because we're still so early on in the medium, like if you think about its really early film, it was like very simplistic. You know, it was just like simple shots. The technology was a big limiting factor there. And the technology today is also a pretty big limiting factor in what you're able to accomplish with your subjects. But then it kind of also depends on the approach that you're taking with them. So if you're constructing interviews with people, you're constructing these scenes, it does require more construction and placing of things and thinking about the direction of a scene than a regular documentary might. I mean, if your style of making a regular documentary is more just like really flying the wall, just capturing like whatever's going on, then it's difficult to do that today in VR. Luckily, my own sort of view on documentaries is that I like constructing things more in documentary. So it suits my own style maybe a little bit more than it would if you want to just kind of capture things. But I'll give you an example of something that that I was trying to do with the MSF project, and that I try and do in other projects, is that one nice thing is that you can, if you set up a scene like a breakfast scene between a family. So there was a Syrian family, and I went into their house in the refugee camp, and I wanted to capture them having breakfast together. And so I went in there and I put the camera in there, and I gave them a couple of different like very broad topics that I wanted them to discuss. And then I just started the camera rolling, and then I went into another room and I just listened to it with the headphones, what they were talking about. And there was somebody else who was translating it to me. And I left the camera in there for almost an hour, and that was a little bit of an experiment, but it actually ended up providing a very natural scene where after the first 15 minutes or so, they actually just kind of got into their normal routine and the normal things that they would talk about. I think that was like fairly effective, but it doesn't always work though.
And that's the same as shooting during a demonstration, for example, you can only focus probably on the chaos and the sounds and the feeling of being there for a moment, but you can't quickly anticipate on maybe your subject meets someone else, or while your camera is focused on this, you see something happen. There's no flexibility like that.
I think that there could potentially be, but it is harder to do. It wouldn't be as easy as just having a small light camera where you can just go boom, okay, shot of this, boom, shot of this, okay, we're following this guy, we're doing this kind of shot. You could potentially do that with a 360 camera because it is still a camera. But if you want to kind of follow the conventions of what makes a 360 shot work, it is more difficult. It's going to be more difficult to get that kind of effects. So maybe I wouldn't say that it's impossible. I think that it's fully possible. I think the cameras are getting smaller, they're getting lighter, the cameras are getting less expensive. And I think that if that's the style that you would want to go for, I think that it's definitely possible to do. But you just need to be really keenly aware of how everything works in 360 and what everything how things are happening in the scene around you, and to try and anticipate how things might change. Like a protest march that's happening, you're not going to just stick the camera in the middle of the protest march, because if you were a good camera person, then you would think, okay, this is not a great spot for this as a 360 shot. I'm going to move the camera over here. I'm going to try and pull in an interview subject from this person. I'm going to move them over here. So if you're experienced enough in doing this kind of shooting, then I think it is possible, but it's hard. It's going to be harder, essentially.
So as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking if I was to shoot a whole demonstration, I would have a multiple camera angle idea.
Yeah, that's another thing you can do.
So would you do this in VR as well, to switch from different angles? I mean, do we speak still of angles when we have a camera that
it's more
shoots?
Like physical positions
near,
in space.
not far.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you could have multiple cameras, of course. If you don't care about one camera seeing the other camera because it's a 360 shot, then then that's okay. But if you care about that, it might be harder to do. But
any other question on these lines? Yep, there, then there.
I spend a lot of time working with 3D modeling and stuff like that, specifically to Wojciech, but any others that want to answer. Do you see this digital workflow that we're sitting in front of a screen, do you see that moving into VR anytime soon?
But what exactly do you mean, like the digital?
Let's say I'm 3D modeling. Do you see that instead of me sitting in front of a computer screen on a keyboard, do you see that there's a road where maybe in a few years that I put on my headset and instead of operating my mouse and keyboard, I'm actually touching the points, dragging.
yeah, it's already happening.
It's already, that's what I was
That's what they're doing already.
Because you mentioned you can only do it comfortably for 20 minutes, so
Yes, so to be honest, I don't believe into this. For me, actually, I can say from perspective of the game maker, like the guy who was doing the interaction stuff for a lot of years, and I'm not saying I'm best of it, but the quite noticeable thing was that when people were playing the video games with just the joystick or gamepad, the game were very accessible, mostly because there was small amount of movement that you have to do. When the game switched to the PC era like 10 or 12 years ago, and then everybody was supposed to use keyboard and mouse and do a lot of movement, and the control became a bit more complicated, then many people was simply dragged out of the games. And then they came back to the games again by playing with the gamepads and so on. For now, I don't believe that for the efficient and long time work, the manipulating something with your hand will be really efficient, because most of the interfaces for doing any kind of, for example, 3D modeling, 3D tools, and I know many of them because I'm actually specialized in the 3D, let's say, graphic processing, are always, let's say, going into direction how to minimize your movement, how to minimize amount of the things you need to do. So it probably will go more into the eye tracking, or maybe it will go more into the brainwave analysis. I'm serious about this because these things are ongoing right now, than into the, let's say, waving your hands everyone. Of course, these interfaces are available. you can use them, but you can use in many of the smart TVs today. You can use the pilot to do some, let's say, on-screen tracking, and you usually still use the buttons on your pilot because it's quicker and more effective to select something.
But I think on the Minority Report sort of effect, will you have something to say? Because this morning we're discussing this.
I agree with you and disagree with you. So I agree with you in that like interaction with like a lot of arm movement is not very physically efficient and it's going to make you feel tired. But at the same time, maybe there's an opportunity there to think about 3D modeling a different way because you can physically move around your model. You can build a game character at scale, and understanding something at scale is really important if you're trying to create VR because that's how people are going to experience it. They're going to experience it at scale. So, while maybe right now the controllers are a bit, they track your arm movements. Once we get better finger tracking, maybe there's going to be, a nice kind of midpoint in there where you'll be able to work as a modeler and be able to really visualize exactly what you're doing in a way that you could never do with a regular monitor. We use headsets in our studio for long periods of time. The whole 20 minutes thing, I think, is not exactly true. You kind of get used to it after a while, but because we do mostly 360 video, a lot of the editing that I do with a headset on. But I'm using a keyboard and mouse, but I can't see my hands, and so I just sort of know where my mouse is and where the keyboard is, and I can kind of flip between a Premiere edit window and like a 360 window, like in VR, and I've spent hours in there doing editing, and it's not.
But in your VR, you're seeing the scene that you're creating, so that's your preview. Your preview is on your VR, and your control is on your computer. Yeah,
and if you're editing 360 video, you really need to be seeing that to understand how to edit, basically. So, anyways.
There was another question there. And
yeah, I have a question concerning mobility. It's somewhat connected to the last question. So judging from the clip of the MSF film, there's even though there's increased subjectivity through the point of view visually and from an audio point of view, there is a striking lack of mobility. And now my question is, how do you approach that lack of mobility in a documentary feature, for example, or in a project?
What do you mean by mobility?
Like moving camera. Okay. What do we do with the tracking movement and all the things that we've been studying for years? Do we bin them or?
Yeah.
The hand camera was invented.
So
that is very similar.
Yeah, well, you can definitely move the camera, but there are certain movement conventions that unless you don't care about making some members of your audience feel motion sickness, because some people don't, they'll just do it anyways. But if you care about that, then there are certain conventions for camera movement that you should usually try and follow, and that is that the camera can move, but it's best if it moves in a straight line and at a constant speed. And if you're doing that, then you're probably not going to make anyone feel motion sick. And for us, that's really important. I think that as people get more used to watching things in VR headsets, their sensitivity will decrease somewhat, and you'll be able to move the camera more. In a lot of the pieces that we did, and especially the MSF piece, we didn't do a lot of camera movement because moving the camera is more difficult in 360 because depending on how you want to try and move it, you may need a dolly track, you may need more sophisticated stabilization equipment, and we didn't really have any of that in the camps. We do use all of those techniques though in other kinds of shoots that we do. So movement is absolutely possible. It just needs to be sort of built into what you're doing, and the basic conventions of movement in VR just need to be followed, I think.
But maybe, Wojtek, you can add another level, because on 360 video, obviously, you have the camera being put on, But if you go into more a game dynamic, and I don't think we could see this today from your demo, you're actually moving in space as a first person. So you are the moving camera in a way. So this is maybe something you want to explore. And
yes, but for now, as a game developers and VR developer, we still didn't resolve the problem of motion sickness, let's say, in the satisfactory ways. For now, the most preferred way is like to use the teleportation. Like you are not moving smoothly, or with, especially not with the acceleration, because it really gives a motion sickness. In most of the VR application, if you move, you just point or select some place where you need to move, and then you are simply teleported there. Then there is no motion sickness. If you try to move, sooner or later the motion sickness will appear in many people's heads. And right now there is even a kind of case study that we call like I don't remember the proper name, but so some people are already being too much let's say influenced by motion sickness, then they are already suffering motion sickness by just looking at the VR device. Really, no, it's not a joke. I know some people who are not using VR because they already had motion sickness enough times to make it like they put it's just their body reaction. They got body sickness just by entering the VR, and this is very serious thing, and we need to keep working on this. But I wouldn't say today we know how to do it. We still need to experiment a lot on this.
I think people, if you feel sick in a VR experience, I think mostly it's because it's just a badly designed experience. Because the best experiences, like Notes on Blindness has some movement in it. There's a part where you sort of walk out and walk back, but that movement follows fairly closely this idea that if you move at a constant speed in a straight line, you're going to make everybody, like, there are very few people that'll feel motion sick from that. And I actually get motion sickness a lot more easily than most people, even though I've been using VR headsets for years now. And so I'm particularly sensitive to like bad motion practice in VR. I think a lot of people that get sick from VR initially are people that just sort of watch the roller coaster experience for the first time, and they're just like, that is going to make you feel really motion sick if you're susceptible. But the best VR experiences are all pretty much completely comfortable for everybody, or at least 99% of people that use them. It's just bad VR is the problem, you know.
Was there another question in the middle, or have I? There you go.
Yes, I have a question for William. In your documentary, you say that you have a lot of interviews. And how do you do interviews in a film and see positive? Because normally when you film somebody, you have journalists or interviewer beside of the camera, and you tell him, look into the camera or don't look into the camera, look at me and answer my questions. How did you manage this?
So in MSF, most of the time I'm actually standing there, and the translator is standing there, and the audio, like Henrik, our good old Henrik, is standing there. And so what we do is we shoot at clean plates. So basically we record everything. We record the whole interview with us all standing there behind the camera or next to the camera, or, you know, in a close sort of setting. And then we conduct the interview. And then right before the interview and right after the interview, we'll do a clean plate of everything. So we'll move everyone out of the scene and clear the scene as much as we can, and then do an empty shot. And then we composite the empty shot over top of the shot with us in it, basically. But when you do this, there's a number of things that can go wrong. Like if the lighting changes a little bit, then you have to manually adjust the lighting on the clean plates. And there's a whole kind of clean plating technique that we've learned how to do over the years that enables us to move things like equipment or people or, you know, whatever out of the scene. But it's a pain in the ass.
There is also other option I could just mention. It's still experimental on our side, but we used it in at least one documentary that we made and interviews simply by recording the interviewed person at the green screen. And then we have composited them into the 360 movie. What you can imagine was quite problematic because of the stereoscopy, because of the camera angles that are much more, let's say, troublemakers when you do it in VR, but in this situation we really had to do so because the scenarios when we want to show people and the people itself were in totally different locations, so we had to do it.
Other questions on practical way things?
I don't have so much of a question. It's more of a remark.
VR. It's interesting, everybody's doing it, but my big problem is that, for example, with 360, I hear about interviews, I hear about, just putting the camera there and filming, and I think we should more wonder, like, what are the things we should do with VR, and what are the things that we should go back to traditional filmmaker, because I rather see a very good, old-fashioned made traditional documentary with interviews instead of having this annoying thing on my head where I can just turn around 360 and I lose all contact with the subject.
So I have an answer to this. So the difference with VR is in how it makes you feel and the potential for how it could make you feel. So if you shoot an interview with the same subject with a 360 camera, and then you shoot that same interview again with a regular camera, the interview that you shoot in 360, assuming that everything is working properly, the camera is good enough, the lighting is good and everything, the person watching that in a VR headset has the potential to have a much stronger reaction to that interview.
How do we know this?
Well, it's...
Because this is something I always wondered. I know everybody says that. It feels like if you're there,
yeah.
And then I heard the back of your brain, I can't remember which piece, immediately thinks just because by motion you feel more there, then suddenly it's supposed to be more emotional. But do we know this? Have we checked it somewhere in the sense that...
I think it's I think it would be a very interesting test to do. I don't think there's ever been like an A/B sort of test of that. But that's what I believe, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
No, it's clearly that and I'm with you in a second, because this is and thank you for your question. Something I wanted to go into with all this idea of the empathy machine. VR allows you to feel presence, to be there. I'm wondering, have we tested enough to understand if it's just a new technology and therefore it feels different and more engaging, or whether effectively on our brain it makes a difference?
I'm not sure. I mean, there are obviously no tests. From what I know of having the same content in 360 and in traditional filmmaking, and to compare if it makes you more empathetic. I kind of agree with you and with you too, because it really depends. I think the important key is to ask yourself, does this really make sense from the story point of view, and also from the whole dispositif, as we say in French. Dispositif. Does it make sense to have this in a 360 configuration? And I think you feel immediately if this is not the case, because then you simply don't have any connection to the story.
For example, Notes on Blindness, for me, was the first VR experience where I had a much stronger emotional reaction with the VR than with the film.
Yes.
I first saw the VR and I thought, wow, this is amazing. And then I saw the film and I thought, like, okay, it's cute, but not special. I mean, I exaggerate, but for me...
And I think you're not the only one.
Yeah, I had something similar.
And maybe some of it is due to the fact that it actually, it's a very strong audio experience, and it lets your imagination recreate the space. And that might be even stronger than illustrating it with real images.
Not everything has its cost. It all depends on not which medium is good or bad, but what they said, what kind of emotions you want to create, or what kind of story you want to tell. With VR, you are limited in some ways of bringing up emotion. You cannot do that much of directors' tricks on the material, because you are limited where you need to stand, where you need to put your camera, how far is camera from your subject, and plenty of other things that normally in the 2D documentary are not a problem. At the other side, you got the feeling of immersion, you got feeling of being displaced. We got one of the documentary that we did on Ukraine, which was about the situation of people who were kidnapped and imprisoned into some dark basements somewhere in the Donetsk. So we really wanted to show how it is to be imprisoned in these dark basements. So we gone to this dark basement, we have scanned them, or we have filmed them in 360 to really let know the audience how it is to be in the middle of such a dirty, ugly basement, and to give you this feeling. So this was proper way of doing this probably. But there was also documentaries where people were asking us, do documentary about this, do documentary about this, and we are telling them, no, it doesn't make sense, because we will lose the dynamics you want to create, or we lose the emotions you want to create just for sake of wow, cool effects in VR.
I mean, one of the things for which VR is good is sense of scale. So I think, again, obviously the answers are never black or white. They're always gray. If it's just an interview, and you could have done the same interview because all you want to do is just to look at the person, so that could have been a normal shot on camera. In that sense, why do we need VR? I mean, at least that's my point of view. If sense of scale is important, like it's not just seeing a space, but feeling the pressure of the space around you because it's too small, or because it's too big, or because whichever reason, then maybe VR is adding that extra perception that gives a feeling as well. So it would be interesting to brainstorm a second on, what are the things that VR really does well that, that are more difficult maybe to achieve on 2D, let's call it like that, cinema. Sense of scale. What else?
Well, I still think that empathy is a really big one.
You are strong on the empathy, yeah?
Yeah, that you can drive it a lot.
I struggle with that one.
Yeah, I know. We were talking about this before. I know.
Do people have something to say about this empathy thing? You've tried stuff on VR. Okay, one there.
Well, actually, I think VR can be great for a lot of things, but as a traditional filmmaker, I don't want to sound conservative, but it sounds a bit as if film and watching a film in theater and reading a book can't work with empathy.
No, I think this is really...
Obviously it can, but I think it's worth pointing out that VR is not a replacement for any of these things. Like, VR is not going to replace film or other mediums. It's just another way of telling a story, and it's a different kind of experience.
But is it empathy, or is it a different sense of presence?
So what would be the subtlety between the two?
Well, with a sense of presence, it is important to feel in the here and now together with the environment you're in. While as in film, it's okay to feel you're looking at a different time as well, maybe. I'm just trying to raise a question there.
I mean, I think presence is definitely an important point. Like, when you think of VR stories, or stories that should be told in VR, is where do you put the viewer in your story, and where it's not only and there is a physical aspect about it, and how he can interact with his environment. And of course, they're not, for the moment, there haven't been many options. I don't know if you have seen, there's this very beautiful short piece called Dear Angelica, which has been made by the Oculus team. And it's a very beautiful, it's really exploring this notion of presence in the space and in the animated space. And it's done really beautiful because you're really into the animated space, and it's slightly interactive, but not too much. So I would encourage you to look at that. But
I also think that when VR will allow to move into space, although it does already, but it does with a gear that very few people can have. So when it would be more of a commercial proposition to move and in the space of the VR, as opposed to just be a bit as a ghost looking around without a body, which I think that is a bit, not really there yet. That will change a lot. And it could also be that it merges eventually with the augmented reality, so that you start to have this idea of space being mixed, where there is reality, there is another level of it, and where you can interact with those. And so that is quite far from where we are now, but I can really see that would be a game changer in the way in which we understand sense of presence, and also the empathy. If I can go towards the person which is on the floor, where if I can do something then I think I am in another dimension, even from an emotional point of view. How far is this merging between those technologies from, no one knows, but just guess.
I mean, we have notions of it when we go into a room scale VR experience, where actually really the fact of having your movements tracked and your touching becomes a reality, really increases the immersion very much. So
that is very
Sure.
powerful, but at the moment
Yeah.
I've only done it in exhibition or festivals. I haven't seen anybody at home that has that type of equipment. So what I'm wondering
it's
is
gonna, the capture technology is going to evolve a lot over the next few years, but I think that you'll probably see two branches. One of them will be more like photogrammetry based capture, and the other one is capturing video, which is volumetric. And eventually those two things might kind of collide, but they're still sort of two different technological approaches to that problem. But it kind of just depends on how much interactivity you want to give the viewer, because as we know, the more interactivity you give the viewer, the harder it is to tell a story effectively. So volumetric video is potentially a really interesting proposition, because you could lean in, but you just couldn't like take the microphone.
Right.
But maybe you don't want to let the viewer take the microphone. I don't know. But in terms of a timeline, I think like Facebook just announced a volumetric video camera, but still probably like 3 or 4 years before it's like cheap enough for any documentary filmmaker to use, I'd say.
So is there any burning question? Because I think we have to start wrap up here. We need to be out of here at 5:30. So, okay. We're going to do them quickly. One there.
Okay. I don't know. I'm gonna think loudly. No question, but maybe tone. I think it has a great potential to put out that, like, to show that space has intelligence.
That space has, sorry?
Intelligence.
Intelligence.
So, like, as we're here in the this physical reality, and then we're feeling our bodies, and maybe just we cannot feel our presence much, or we cannot empathize with the real world. So we're trying to searching for a new sort of understanding of a new world. Maybe my question would be: is this going to create how we put a boundary between physical world and the virtual world? Like, are they going to merge much? I don't know.
Yeah, they're going to merge a lot, especially when you've got, like, in the further out in the future, an augmented reality headset, which is also a VR headset, which is also a mixed reality headset, which can place fictional objects into your actual environments, which can take you into a completely different environment, and which can, give you information about anything that you look at in your field of view. And I think that's going to really, really do a lot of weird, interesting things to society when they have that capability. Like, if I didn't want to, if I had a really, really amazing AR, VR, MR headset on, then I could change your head into a pumpkin, let's say. Like, maybe I would want to do this presentation and I just tell my headset, change all of the heads in this room into pumpkins. And that's what I would see in my field of view. And so how's that going to change how people think of reality over time? It's a big question.
It comes with a few ethical problems,
Sure.
or challenges, let's say, at least.
Challenges, yeah.
The documentary's way of looking at the world and this way of looking at it, I think maybe they're somehow influenced by.
Yeah, definitely.
Are you following up
Yeah.
on this? I can see you're very active on your question. No? So let's just, there was someone else before you then. Yes, please.
I'll follow up on that.
Good. Let's follow up.
Well, just going back to this idea of empathy, I think is a little bit problematic because, empathy in a way is the middle class gets to feel good about themselves, cry a little bit, and go back to their own lives, right? But I think what he's trying to say maybe is that how could there be a self-reflective moment when things can actually sort of shift in your, this is the biggest problem with liberal documentary to begin with. So this idea of empathy, I feel, I cry, and then I go on with my life, doesn't really, work in the end. But
But isn't that? But if you felt something that was stronger than what you would have felt if you had watched a film, isn't that a net positive? I mean, aside from all of the sort of political byproducts there, like if you can make somebody feel something more strongly, which has a net positive effect of, I understand the situation this person is in. I understand what it would potentially be like. But maybe it's not a perfect representation, but maybe it brings you just a little bit closer than you would in other mediums. Then I think that there's benefit to that. You know, I mean.
What do you do with that? Not so much how much you feel it. Because whether you feel a little bit or a lot, it's still the same feeling.
Well, that's more of a societal question than a technological one. But.
Not necessarily, actually. I think there is a, and also whether including an interaction within the story, like giving options to do within the story itself, as opposed to most of what we see in VR is watch but don't do. I'm not speaking about games again. I understand that's a different.
It's not just about games and about interactivity. It's about really the significance impact of the medium on someone's mind. If we assume that books have some, let's say, low level of immersion, movies have higher level of immersion, and video games have even higher level of immersion, and then we have VR. Please note that we don't have, for example, age rating for the books, or almost none. For the movies, there is some, they are not that restrictive. For the games, we got quite restrictive age ratings because the games can really play with your mind. So if we assume that VR can play with your mind even stronger, so we need actually to be a bit cautious about what we deliver and how it will affect the people's mind, because I strongly believe that brutality or pornography or other things in the VR can do much more of the bad things to people than they would do in the movies or in the books.
Agreed. I definitely agree with that.
I wanted just to comment on the empathy because we keep discussing this question for like a few years now, and I think it's wrong thing to connect empathy with the medium. It's a storytelling that evokes empathy, no matter what the medium is. Whether it's a film, book, VR, whatever medium is, as long as it's a good storytelling. So I think that we should just split those two.
No, I cannot agree. I believe that there is something like sense of presence and believability of the medium. If
What you were saying, and that's what I agree with, but I don't need to be in a VR.
But empathy depends on immersion. If you feel that someone is really close to you, you feel his emotions different. For example, this is why in the normal movies, when you want to feel someone's emotion stronger, that you show close up on his face, because then you feel his emotions stronger. So in virtual reality, if you go even closer to him because you really feel like you are next to him or to her, then you feel this empathy. And for me, it doesn't matter if you call it that it is separate from medium or not, but this medium allows you to create stronger empathy, and storytelling also has to somehow, let's say, be built around this. But medium, for sure, allows you to create the stronger emotions, including the empathy.
But I think that's very subjective, no? It's what you're saying, like when you read the book, you can't feel like strongly empathetic.
I just want to point out one thing, actually. I just want to point out one thing. So when we're talking, there's a difference between immersion and presence. So
Exactly.
presence is a physical property that you get in VR. And it has been fairly widely studied by loads of different university researchers. Presence is when, in a VR experience, you're on a ledge and you look over the ledge and you can't step over the ledge because your brain, this deep sort of reptilian part in your brain, is saying, don't step over the ledge. So I think the idea that VR content, when we talk about empathy in VR, what we're talking about is something which is, if you can experience something and your brain is believing in the physicality of that experience, then it has a stronger reflection in your mind than it does if you're sitting on your couch watching a movie. And I'm not saying that books cannot drive empathy or that films cannot drive empathy. They obviously can. But what I'm saying is that there is a physical property to the idea of presence which drives all kinds of emotions and things harder than it does in other mediums.
And I just suppose that empathy is the wrong word, and this is why we keep
Yeah,
having
maybe.
this problem here. So, on the empathy thing, let's give it a close because we need to, finish up. We're going to eventually continue empathy outside as real being, with sense of presence. There was one question there that really insisted, so we'll go for that one as the last one.
Just will put a very short parenthesis saying that when the Fred Lumiere presented the first film,
People ran away.
everybody was
Yeah.
running out of the room.
It's
Yeah,
a
it
myth.
didn't actually
That
happen.
story is a myth.
Not true.
But it is not a myth that any new technology and medium that arrived always is sold as being more realistic than the one before. When photography arrives, cinema arrives, of course, and then you get used to it because your brain learns to decode the medium itself, and so then there is a learning curve, and I think we're still in the learning curve where we are. Aha.
I don't think that's exactly true, but maybe we'll park that one.
We'll part that one. I think we have to be quite strict with time. Jean-Pierre, I'm looking at you to know how. So, exactly. So, I'd like to close, but as a closing thing, I had a last question for you guys, and really whether it could be just a 1 minute each max. And I would like to open up at the end of this discussion where we've been dissecting everything and go back into a sort of positive mood of, well, this stuff is exciting, can be exciting, how can we use it? And so for each of you, I'd like to have an idea of a projection in 3 years' time of where do you think the technology that excites you realistically in 3 years' time will be, and what would be your dream project, the thing that you really would love to do within the next 3 years? Something that makes you dream, like, this stuff is worth it. Wojtek.
Actually, I can say I almost started to work on my dream project for the next 3 years. So for me, not for the whole industry, because I don't care that much about the whole industry, because I don't know where it will go. I'm not trying to estimate it, because I would be crazy if I would say that I know where industry will be in the 3 years. But for me, my dream project is about making the best mixed reality experience. Like, for example, what William said, exchanging all your heads into the pub keys, or allowing to mix this room with the part of the other room, and make something like the really immersive documentaries when you can simply mix different worlds inside one of the application, including the haptic feedback, including the physical interaction into mixed reality world with some objects that really exist and really don't exist in this world. So this is what I'm hoping to keep working for the next years.
Yeah,
Really?
I think so too.
No dream project?
I can relate to that. I think it's exciting to think about mixed reality, and it's also exciting to think about not only documentary formats but also fictional formats. I know that you're more concerned by the documentary formats, but for me, at the moment, there's almost no fiction. There has been a funny piece done by Felix and Paul. I don't know if you know.
Felix and Paul.
With Funny or Die. And
check them online.
I think comedy could be an interesting field to explore. In VR,
it's
yes.
Comedy in VR, yeah.
Comedy in VR. I know it sounds crazy, but you asked for crazy.
I've asked for it. The Arc.
Yeah.
Björk, the singer.
Oh, yes. Yes.
Yeah, there's some good ones there.
Will, your dreams?
So 3 years from now, I want the perfect 360-degree camera that does positional tracking. It does depth estimation properly. It's like, say, 12K per eye, something like that. That's the camera that I want. And the dream project that I have is this project that I was talking about earlier, and it's to make a VR documentary about Tristan da Cunha, which is the most remote islands or the most remote inhabited islands in the world. And the people that live on Tristan da Cunha are the world's most isolated human beings. And I wanted to make a film about this, but when I went there in 2010 or 2011, actually, it was such an amazing environment, such an amazing place that I wanted to try taking people there with the film, and then that kind of led me into VR, and that's actually sort of how I got into VR in the first place. So my dream project is to make a VR film about Tristan da Cunha. There you go.
Fantastic. So thank you for dreaming. Thank you everybody for being here and producing and making those dreams going in one direction. Before we go into the final clap to thank you for being here, I also want to thank the technical team who is working hard making this working. Thank you very much. I always want to remind you that behind what you're seeing here, there's a whole team working. And the interactive documentary workshop is composed by quite a few people that stay silent sometimes in this event. So I'd like to name them, like Susanna Lott, who is sitting there on our left, Elisabetta Lazzaroni, and Nicole Tagliabue, who really helped in putting all of this together, and obviously our wonderful guests. So thank you for being here, and a big clap.